Right, so we got some pretty major updates coming out of Ukraine right now, where it appears like President Vladimir Putin is still intent on completely overthrowing the Ukrainian government and either installing a pro-Russian leader or, I guess, indefinitely occupying the country. But nonetheless, there's been an absolute wave of different things that have been happening, both from the NATO side, from the Russian side. We've seen war crimes committed. We've seen massive new sanctions packages that have come out. So I'm probably going to have to cover this in a couple different videos. But just to start us off here in this one, we have some good old-fashioned bipartisan unity, not unexpected on the subject of war. So I got a couple different takes here, one from an establishment Democrat and one from an establishment Republican, both of them giving us a perfect insight into some of the worst things that we could possibly do in this massively chaotic situation right now. So first here, to start us off, we have Eric Swalwell, who is a Democrat, who was floating the idea of kicking Russians out of US universities in retaliation to Putin invading Ukraine. And he said more severe options could come. So first of all, this should be just completely ridiculous at face value because, not only do Russian civilians in Russia largely oppose what Vladimir Putin is doing right now. We've covered the stories of thousands of people who have been taking to the streets to protest Putin's violent imperialist actions. So not only do they not support it, but what the fuck do Russian citizens who are studying here in the United States have to do with a dictator's actions over in Russia? They have absolutely no connection. They didn't vote for this. They didn't even necessarily vote for Vladimir Putin. So if they don't support these actions and they aren't directly, responsible for the actions of an authoritarian regime, why the fuck would you punish them? I mean, this is literally just collective punishment for the actions of Vladimir Putin, which is just complete nonsense. I mean, we're literally going back to the days of the World War II Japanese internment camps to collectively punish one group of people or one ethnicity from one country for the actions of their authoritarian leaders. It's complete nonsense. It's, bigoted, and it's absolutely ridiculous and should be rejected, okay? This and all other proposals that seek to punish Russian citizens around the world or seek to harm Russian civilians within Russia domestically, all of those things should be completely out of the question, okay? Completely ridiculous proposal here. And to follow him off, again, with some good bipartisan unity here on the prospects of war, we have Adam Kinzinger, who has frequently been praised by liberals for being nominally anti-Trump, I guess, but he had potentially an even worse take than Eric Swalwell. He said, "The fate of Ukraine is being decided tonight, but also the fate of the West. Declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine at the invitation of their sovereign government," which they have asked us to do. "Disrupt Russia's air ops and give the heroic Ukrainians a fair fight. It's now or never." So listen, at the end of the day, I do support average Ukrainian civilians, especially, if they want to go and defend their territory, if they want to go and defend their communities, that's perfectly fine. Russia is being the aggressor. They are doing a full-scale invasion of the entirety of Ukraine, from the eastern to the western to the southern and northern borders there. It's an all-out offensive. So you understand and sympathize with average Ukrainian civilians that are just trying to protect their communities, of course, but dragging U.S. airships, dragging NATO, airstrike capabilities into this conflict completely ratchets that up to an entirely different level that would lead to more chaos, more destruction, more civilian casualties, etc. on the ground, and would basically help absolutely nobody. So he continues saying, number two, "History teaches that taking a stand is inevitable and gets more costly with time. We own the skies," whatever the fuck that means. "Russia cannot hold a candle to our air power." That's also objectively questionable here. "Do this. Putin is too dangerous to hope he is satisfied with just Ukraine." So this part is yet to be seen. Could Putin have further territorial ambitions beyond Ukraine? I highly doubt it, unless we're talking about maybe Belarusian territory. But there's almost no chance that he's going to escalate this into an invasion of other NATO countries, even if they do, run up straight onto his border. That would be essentially declaring a full-out war with NATO and with thereby the United States, another nuclear-armed superpower, which is really the main reason why this is completely delusional and dangerous for U.S. politicians to be floating this out here, as if this is a possibility. Because listen, you don't just get to establish a no-fly zone over a different country. You have to enforce that no-fly zone, which means you would be sending either NATO airstrike capabilities or U.S. fighters and Air Force members to go directly enforce this. And so why is that a terrible idea? Well, here with a great breakdown from Vox, they say a Ukrainian no-fly zone would put the world on the brink of nuclear war. And honestly, call me a radical, but I tend to think that, however chaotic and terrible the situation is right now, a nuclear war is pretty much the worst thing that we could possibly put on the table, right? Nuclear annihilation, a nuclear holocaust, a clash between the two countries that have over 90% of the world's stockpiles in the US and Russia, that would be significantly worse. So they say the US and its allies have used no-fly zones 3 times in the recent past: Iraq after the Gulf War, Bosnia during the mid-90s conflict, and Libya during the 2011 intervention. In each of those cases, the US and its partners were facing vastly inferior military forces. There was no real question about their ability to take control over the skies. Russia is an entirely different story. Its air force dwarfs Ukraine's. It is second in size only to the US Air Force, and an attempt to impose the no-fly zone in Ukraine would be nothing like these previous engagements, and it's not even clear that it would be possible. And they say, according to US Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Tyson Wetzel, the Air Force doesn't have the appropriate amount of planes near Ukraine to launch such a mission in the immediate future. And even more important, he argues any effort to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine would get NATO directly involved in a conflict it has been staying out of. We have been giving them weapons and supplies, logistical support, intelligence, etc., but directly staying out of, and would have a near 100% chance of leading to a direct US-Russia armed conflict, which a direct conflict between the US and Russia would mean nuclear war. Okay, again, something we should probably be trying to avoid here. Now, this also comes at a time where President Vladimir Putin basically upped the ante on their stance towards nuclear weapons and has been essentially posturing and saying any other countries that try to get directly involved in this conflict or escalate it even further, you will be subjected to the fact that we are a nuclear armed superpower. So massively alarming. We also had Belarus, their president came out, signed a declaration that they are potentially going to be allowing Russian nuclear weapons to be inside Belarusian territory. So again, upping that ante. So if anything, we should be pushing in the exact opposite direction and trying to denuclearize and trying to reduce the chance that we would have some sort of a confrontation between NATO and Russia. But nonetheless, Adam Kinzinger trying to push us further and further close to that reality. But thankfully, the Joe Biden administration seems to be doing somewhat of the right thing right now, just in terms of this no-fly zone specifically. They say here from Sahil Kapoor, he says on MSNBC, the press secretary says no-fly zone is not a good idea. Yeah, because implementing it would put the US on the hook for military escalation. We are not going to have a military war with Russia with US troops. Okay, so that's the right mindset to have, I think, again, for pretty obvious reasons. There seem to be a lot of people who are both on the establishment Democratic side and on the establishment Republican side who are just trying to throw everything against the wall to appear as anti-Russia, anti-Putin as physically possible right now, which is somewhat understandable because, yes, Putin is a capitalist oligarchical, violent imperialist figure who just invaded another country. Yes, all of that can be 100% true, while at the same time it being true that he also has access to the world's largest store of nuclear weapons. So you kind of gotta gauge both of those things at the same time and try to calibrate your response in what the US and what NATO and what the West should be doing in response to this entire situation. You have to calibrate that with the fact that the guy who is sitting on the other end of the table with you has nuclear weapons. That's a pretty big fucking deal. So at the end of the day, I'm not saying Russia shouldn't be punished. They absolutely should. Go after the oligarchs, go after Vladimir Putin directly if you want to do that. But we have to understand that creating destabilization within Russia will have consequences, not only for, the Putin regime, but mostly for average Russian civilians. And escalating this conflict, leading us closer to a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia or the US and Russia is the exact opposite of what we should be doing right now. We should be aggressively lobbying for diplomatic solutions or even concessions or trying to push for peace in whatever capacity is even possible right now, given the terrible situation on the ground. Not saying it's easy, not saying it's simple, but these are the types of takes that you got to watch out for that would do absolutely nothing but serve to escalate the likelihood that we are heading to a larger scale war.